According to data from World Population Prospects, by 2050, 1 in 6 people in the world will be over the age 65. 2021, seniors 60 years and older outnumbered children under 5. By 2050, 80% of seniors will live in low and middle income countries. Adapting health and social systems to this demographic shift is a major challenge globally. We believe it is everyone's responsibility to provide solutions for the social determinants of health. We are motivated by a deep sense that these issues can have immense consequences on individuals, families, communities, and society as a whole. We're mission-driven. Join us on the Boomer Living broadcast for episodes of full information, inspiration, and advice for seniors. Our expert panelists will discuss topics like senior healthcare, dementia, caregiving, technology for seniors, and affordable senior living options. This podcast is your guide. And here is your host, Han Brown.
Hi, I'm Han Brown, host of the Boomer Living broadcast. On the show, industry leaders share information, inspiration, and advice for those who care for seniors. Our expert panelists discuss senior healthcare, dementia, caregiving technology for seniors, and affordable senior living options, all of which address the social determinants of health. So thank you so much for participating in today's conversation. Check out our CareString, a recently launched platform where we match seniors with caregivers and guide businesses and their employees through the caregiving journey for their loved ones. So please check out CareString. And for those of you in the audience, we love to hear from you. So comment below if you have any questions, and we're glad that you're here. So today's topic is senior housing. Is it a lifestyle or medical necessity? With the aging of the baby boomers, senior housing has become a hot topic. Many people are concerned about how they will pay for their parents' care while also saving money and planning for retirement. So there's no easy answer to this question, but we can discuss what's happening in senior housing, the pandemic effects on occupancy, healthcare-related costs, and staffing, and many of the major issues facing seniors today. So senior housing is a rapidly growing industry. The number of seniors in the United States is expected to double by 2030, reaching an estimated 70 million people over the age of 65. But with this growth comes challenges for senior living providers and their residents, including rising healthcare costs, staffing shortages, and much more. So join me today in conversation is Calvin Schnure. He's the Senior Vice President, Research and Economic Analysis at NAREIT. In his role, Calvin analyzes developments in the macroeconomy and their impact on REITs and commercial property markets and on financial returns to REITs. He also monitors performance of mortgage REITs and conditions in the U.S. mortgage market. Calvin also conducts original research on REIT stock market returns and economic fundamentals. So Calvin, welcome to the show.
Good morning, and thanks for having me back again.
Yeah, thank you. How are you?
Doing all right. Happy New Year. A little bit late, but still Happy New Year.
Yeah. Well, welcome back, and thank you for this opportunity for Take Two.
Thanks.
Yeah. So in addition to your professional life, could you share with us something on a personal side?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I'm senior economist at NAREIT, and we represent commercial real estate, REITs that own commercial real estate. And I analyze the overall economy as an economist, but then I look at conditions in all types of commercial real estate markets, which are office buildings, malls, shopping centers, apartments, but also senior housing. REITs are some of the significant investors and operators in senior housing. So I'll be talking about that. I'm also going to be basing some of my comments on research that I've done on the development of senior housing over the past 30 years, but I'll also have to reflect on what I've seen with my family. My parents moved into a senior living community when they were in their late 70s. My father died over 10 years ago of dementia, and was able to go from independent living into a nursing unit. They did not have memory care in their place, but it meant that they didn't have to move. They didn't have to be in completely different locations. It was a much easier transition dealing with my father's decline. My mother, fortunately, is still alive. She's 98 years old. She lives outside of Pittsburgh, where I grew up. And I've seen an awful lot about the community where she lives and the services that she gets in that community. And that has actually really informed a lot of my research and analysis that I do professionally.
Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing your wisdom professionally and personally to this conversation. So in terms of the economy, commercial real estate and REITs in 2022, so which pandemic changes are temporary and which are permanent?
Yeah, that's been a really important issue that a lot of people didn't understand. It was hard to tell. If we look back to where we were almost 2 years ago, it was hard to tell just where we were going because it's unprecedented. And as you and I discussed before we sat down in front of the cameras, a lot of the changes, if you separate them between the permanent and the temporary, you have a bit better understanding of what's going on. So what happened very early in the crisis was many things were shut down completely, and we didn't know how long it was going to last. And in terms of real estate, there were some sectors that were hit very hard. The malls were closed, shopping centers were closed, and so the stores were not having any sales at all, and they weren't making their lease payments to the property owners. That caused a real concern in the market of, are they going to survive? Are they going to get through it all? We've seen similar things in the office market. Work from home has become a lifeline for a lot of businesses and employees that did not want to take the health risks of everyone being in person. But that also means that many office buildings, maybe some of the tenants would not renew their leases. Is this permanent or is it temporary? We see a similar thing in senior housing. I'll talk a little bit more later on as we get on, but in terms of occupancy and what it's meant for the overall business, there are some very large short-term impacts that are not going to stick around, but there's some others that probably will. But in terms of the overall economy and real estate market, I think we were all pleasantly surprised that despite the terrible loss of the health issue, the death, and all of the problems from the crisis, we've learned to adapt how we live without raising our risks to the pandemic. So I mentioned working from home. People have used e-commerce. People have changed the way they live. People have changed the way they work. People have changed the way they shop in ways that we can get through our I don't want to say our normal lives. We can get through our daily lives without being the way it had been before. All of those impacts affect commercial real estate because most of our economic activity, most of our entertainment activity, most of our living activity takes place in a commercial structure. And if you own your home, then that's a private structure. But most everything else is commercial. And just talking about the difference between the temporary and the permanent. Now, the overall economy was weak and the stock market fell quite a bit. We saw in the early months of the pandemic, I think people who were relying on a 401k for their retirement were quite alarmed. How am I possibly going to live if this is a permanent change? Fortunately, as the economy adapted and you realize that businesses and property owners and everyone else would have a workaround, the stock market came back. What happened in 2020 is the overall stock market ended up being up almost 20%. But REITs that are a publicly listed way of investing in commercial real estate, they were still down 5% for the year because people were concerned that the impact on commercial real estate, I mentioned senior housing, but also shopping centers and so on, would be permanent. Well, what happened over the past year in 2021 was the REITs showed that they were resilient, that some of the biggest fears that people had about the impact of the pandemic proved to be temporary. REITs rose 41% last year, well above the rest of the market, because it came back saying that some of these things we were really worried about, we're getting through, and we see a bright future. I mentioned the malls. Mall stocks, they almost doubled last year because people realized we still like to go to the mall. We still like to do many of the things that we had done before the pandemic. These also affect senior living. The immediate impact has been the industry is really caught in some pincers. The occupancy rates are down. Occupancy rates were normally 90, 95%. You have 5%, 6% vacancy, something like that. Occupancy rates fell below 80%, some of them below 75%. And it's understandable. When I talk about senior housing, I include independent living and assisted living, but also skilled nursing. And unfortunately, skilled nursing were some of the areas that were really devastated early on in the crisis, the health issues. And it was difficult to move into a facility in the middle of a health crisis that was affecting those facilities. So they've been very hard hit. But again, it wasn't just the skilled nursing, the assisted living and the independent living also saw really large declines in occupancy. Now, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but we've seen those recovering pretty quickly, but they still have a long way to go. So on the one hand, if you only have 4 out of 5 units occupied, 20% vacancy, your revenues are way down, but their costs are up quite a bit. Every senior housing operator is trying to make sure that the residents are safe. So whether that's putting in the cleaning, the personal protection, all of the issues that they're doing to try to safeguard the population, that adds to cost. So it's a real problem for the industry of saying, well, your revenues are down and your costs are up, but you need to provide these. What do you do? Now, just to reflect back on what I was saying at the beginning, the good news is that most of these problems are temporary. They're not permanent. The industry is showing that 2021, particularly the second half of 2021, was a year of recovery. And I expect to see more recovery in the year ahead as we get through the current wave of the Omicron variant of COVID. And, we all hope by the springtime, getting back towards a more comfortable, less worrisome daily routine.
Absolutely. We can do a deeper dive with the senior living, all the important components that you describe. So what are your thoughts on the aging population in the U.S., and what does this mean for the traditional housing market?
What we've seen over the past 30 plus years is a real change in the model of how seniors live. I think if we look at a Norman Rockwell picture, you see mom and dad, and they're cooking in the kitchen. Dad has come home with his suit, and the kid is by the fire, and the dog is there. And there's the grandparent in the rocking chair sitting, watching this all go on. And that looks idyllic. The reality for many families is if both parents work, they're not at home during the day to care for the aging parent. If both parents work and they've moved from Pittsburgh to Washington, D.C., they're not even in the same city as their parents. Meanwhile, we're fortunate that modern medicine has given us a lot of things that can help improve the quality of life as we get older. But sometimes you can't get all those tests done when you're at home. What senior living does is it actually provides a really comfortable environment for a lot of people where they're not a burden on their children. They're not forced to move away from where they had lived most of their adult lives to be where their children had chosen to settle down. And then they can get higher levels of care in that facility, not even just in assisted living. But my mother, I mentioned my mother earlier, a number of years ago, they had been doing some just regular diagnostic tests. She took exercise classes. It's kind of nice in your early to mid 90s to be down there doing the exercise classes, but they said, we're concerned, Mrs. Schnure, about your balance. Your balance isn't as good as it had been. We're going to work with you to do exercises so that you don't fall. We all know that falls are a very serious risk. She did the exercises. It really helped her strengthen, gave her the ability to live more confidently. I don't think that someone in my mother's situation who had been living on their own, in their own house, when the children had moved to some city, someplace else, would have had the opportunity for that type of preventive care. So again, this is just a new model that it's different from the Norman Rockwell model, but it's a community that provides a lot of support for the people who are living there.
Socialization, care, great diet, nutrition. So, certainly there's a lot of benefits. And, if you age at home as long as you possibly can, You may be able to have those if you have the infrastructure to support that. Again, it comes with a cost, and you just got to find the right fit for your loved ones. And there's so many components that come into that consideration. So I see what you're saying. I think for my own journey, we had to consider that for my mom. And then another barrier is, at least for us, the ability to speak English well, right? So that was another barrier that we had to overcome for my mom. So thank you. So now, what do you think as far as, are there enough senior housing or communities for people of advancing age?
Well, this is a really interesting question, and it gets back at what I was talking earlier about short run and long run issues. When I shift from my personal family experience to my professional work, a lot of the work in the investment community in senior housing is looking at the overall supply, and people are really concerned because there's very heavy levels of construction of senior housing over the past 5 to 10 years. And many analysts would point out that the baby boom generation is not going to be hitting their 80s for another decade or so. And there are a lot of people who were saying this construction is way ahead of the game and is unnecessary. Now, I'd have two reactions to that. First of all, as I was just mentioning these lifestyle changes, people are moving into senior housing much earlier under this new model than they had in the past. If you go back another generation, my grandfather had moved into a nursing home when he was 90 years old. And actually, the name of it was the Presbyterian Old Folks Home. So it was clearly not the community for active seniors that we see in a lot of places right now. But most of the senior living facilities now really are communities for people who are not moving there just for a medical reason. So they're moving in much earlier. So this new supply was meeting the early part of the baby boom generation that wants to have a place where they don't have to worry about the furnace and shoveling the walking, cutting the grass. And they also don't want to have to move their home when they're in the middle of a health crisis in their 80s or something. We're seeing people moving into senior housing much earlier. So this large construction wave that's been coming along, has been meeting some of this early demand from the baby boomers. But the real question you're saying is, do we have enough? No. When the baby boom generation gets squarely into the mid to late senior years, there are going to be millions more Americans, millions more baby boomers like me, who are probably looking forward to having a community like that to live.
Mm-hmm. There's definitely a demand for it. So what is your thought on the misconceptions about senior housing?
Well, this is what I was just talking about right now. Some analysts that I see in the investment community say, well, people don't move in until they're 82 or 85, and so the supply is excessive. But that's really not the case. There are many people who may not move in until they have some crisis in their 80s, but a lot of people move in their late 70s, mid 70s, or so on. And that there is the demand there, but that also reflects a lifestyle choice. If we go back 2 generations, the nursing home model is kind of like a hospital room. You didn't have a lot of personal space. You didn't have comfortable chairs. You didn't have something that felt like an apartment. You were obviously in a medical facility, so people wanted to delay it as long as possible. I mentioned some of my economic research on this. I wrote a research paper a number of years ago right now with a colleague, Shruti Venkatesh, where we looked at the change in choices of senior housing. And what we found is, before the rise of the modern senior housing living model, if you looked at wealth and income versus whether you were living in your own home or in a senior facility, there was a negative relationship between income and wealth and whether you were in senior housing. And that was because anyone who had money would want to avoid going into the old folks' home. You want to stay at home, and that cost a lot of money. The interesting thing is, in the mid-90s, you started having the rise of these more modern retirement communities, and all of a sudden the relationship flipped. The relationship flipped because these places are not, they're not cheap. They're not necessarily expensive, but there's some luxury places you could choose, I'm sure. But for a lot of them, you have to have some money to get in. But it's become an attractive lifestyle choice. So I would say that's the biggest misconception is many people are thinking you're not going to move into the senior living until you're old and really need the care because it's not very attractive. And I think the exact opposite is true. People are moving in earlier because it's a comfortable way of living in a community where you can get the support as needed. And as you go from independent living to getting older and having more frailties, you can move into assisted living or you can move into something else. And that makes it a lot more attractive option earlier in life than many people had realized.
Low maintenance, right? Vibrancy, purposeful, full of activities and engagement. And let's say if you want to, spur of the moment, leave things behind and travel, you don't really have to do a whole lot of coordinating. You can
Yeah.
leave and travel, visit your kids or grandkids. So
Yeah,
there's a lot of
you talk
benefits.
about activities. My mom has a regular coffee group that she gets together and talks with people, and she has the engagement that keeps her active and keeps her interested in having friends. And as much as I love the house where I grew up, where I lived as a child, if she had been alone in that house after my father died, I don't think she would be getting together with 6 or 8 people for coffee 3 times a week, with friends for dinner. I'd be a lot more lonely, a lot more isolated. I emphasize the word communities when I talk about a retirement community, a senior living community, because that's what I've seen in my own family's experience.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Hi
hello?
there. Hi there. I can hear you. Somehow we got swapped. You're me and um can you see me okay? You're
Yeah, I can see,
frozen.
I was talking earlier about how working from home and telecommuting saved a lot of things in terms of working from home. It's not seamless. So maybe my Wi-Fi had a little glitch here. I'm not sure. I hope that the viewers realize that you're not Calvin and that I'm not Han, but I can see you fine.
Yeah, yeah. Yep. Okay. Well, we'll just go along. Not sure what quite happened there. So, the aging population has been a hot topic in the past few years, but this is also a great time for society to consider how we can have an aging friendly world. What is your take on this?
Well, as I am moving into that age group myself, I certainly hope so. We all have our own experiences, our own family. There are many things that you can do to make an aging friendly world a reality. One is recognizing that the older members of our families are not a burden. When I mentioned the Norman Rockwell picture, there are also some pictures from that time period where there was the older grandparent who was a burden in the household and so on. One of the nice things about senior housing is it gives a comfortable place for people to live when their children may not have the space for them to live in their home. Right now, housing markets are really challenging situation for millions of Americans. Housing costs are rising very rapidly, whether you want to buy a new home and you find the prices have risen 20%, or you want to rent something and you find that the apartments, there are very few available and they're also expensive. There are a lot of people who would not be able to take an aging parent into their home right now. But they're also concerned that the parent, oh, did we lose this again? Okay, lost it for a second. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, let me just proceed, and I'll ignore these glitches. I'm sorry to the audience. I don't design the technology, and I struggle with using it the same way many other people do. But it could be difficult for many people in this housing market to take their parents in at a time when they might think that their parents really are not able to function as well in their own home. Senior housing is a really nice solution for millions of families in that way. And I think that's a way that this is an aging friendly society says, here's a way for these people to have, good productive lives. They can interact with their family, their grandchildren, as needed without imposing on the families that are struggling to get through a difficult time for everyone in this country.
I agree. Now, for those of you in the audience, we'd love to hear from you. So comment below if you have any questions, and we're thankful that you're here. And I want to acknowledge a person here commenting. Let me just try to get this here. Can you see the comments, Kelvin?
I can see it. Someone just said technology after my technology went out again. So yes, I can see some. Are you saying the one from the LinkedIn user?
Yeah, go ahead. Take a shot at
New
that.
commercial property portfolios of care village type developments for 55 plus and senior housing be created. These portfolios to be integrated into healthy aging and care services from public or private sector. One of the important features of the modern senior housing environment is there are many choices. There are choices because there are many different people who are in different situations. There are 55 plus, where all it is an age-restricted community saying, we're going to focus the services in our community not on schools and swimming pool, but more on things that you need for aging families. And then you get into the specific senior housing developments that have independent living and assisted living. They're able to provide a different choice for individuals with different needs. So I say definitely there should be new commercial property portfolios. And I think you're seeing this. If you look across the country right now, there's still a lot of construction of all of these types. Some that are not providing a lot of services for people who are older and need those services. But there are others that are focusing on not just independent living and assisted living, providing memory care, that are providing the long-term care for people who are living longer. Medical technologies let us live longer. And we need all of these different types of senior housing to take care of all the different types of needs that people will have.
So do you think the pandemic changed how elders interact with each other and their surroundings?
Oh, the pandemic has changed how we all interact with each other. The downside, of course, we miss the direct contact that we have with family, with friends, with grandchildren, with anyone else. But it's also given an escape valve in a lot of ways. I'm sure that there are millions of grandparents across the country who every day are able to talk to their grandchildren on Zoom that we hadn't heard of Zoom 2 years ago. The technology has really helped there. But technology is just a way of enabling something that's a basic human need. And social contact is important for our mental health, for our social health, and people find a way around it. And what are we seeing with older people who may not be able to interact in the community? No, you don't want to go out when you have a very high wave of COVID infection, but you find the ways that you can contact. You don't get the hug, but you do see the smile.
Absolutely. Okay, Kelvin, let's take a look at some of these comments. I'm going to read them to you and take it on.
Oh,
There's
yeah,
one
staffing question.
Toby.
I mentioned earlier that costs have risen. I did not mention staffing. One of the biggest shifts in the job market. We see the stories about quits. People. Okay, I'm guessing from experience that you can hear me again now. My screen just went blank. It's technology again. I'll continue talking because I assume that you can hear me, if not see me. When I come back, you can ask me to repeat otherwise. We've seen that there are a lot of people who are in frontline jobs who are quitting. Okay, were you able to hear me while I was talking?
Pieces of it, but please repeat.
Let me start again.
Yes.
I talked about revenues being down because there are a lot of vacant spaces, costs being up for providing protective equipment and cleaning and so on, but labor costs are up an awful lot. And this is actually continuing something that was a challenge even before the pandemic. There were a lot of senior living places that had difficulty hiring workers because many of them are not really highly paid jobs. And they're having difficulty finding people who are in the communities where the people were living. Well, that has been magnified many-fold during the pandemic, especially with nursing. And so the skilled nursing facilities are really struggling. We've seen a very large exodus of nurses from skilled nursing and also in the rest of senior housing, because many times they may be getting more money working as a traveling nurse or working someplace else with all the rise in medical issues. This is a major issue that's not going to be solved in the next year or two. And unfortunately, I think it's going to raise the costs of senior housing. It's going to raise the cost of living in a senior housing because you're going to have to pay these people. You're going to have to pay these people a good wage. They're working hard. I know that in my mother's community, they have an annual fundraiser for an employees fund that helps. That it helps, but it's not a replacement for a good paycheck. So yes, the staffing issues, again, especially with the skilled nursing, but not just with skilled nursing, the restaurant meals and serving. I know that many places have shifted from table serving to buffet style because they just don't have the people who can come and do that. Now, this is not only in senior housing. A lot of the service industries are having difficulty retaining workers right now and finding new workers. When I say the service industries, that includes the hotels, the travel, the restaurants, the bars, and the senior living. This is going to be a challenge. It is a challenge right now, and is going to be a challenge, certainly for all of this year, probably in the next 2 or 3 years, I would guess.
Great input. Now, I would like to acknowledge another guest. Hi, all. Kelvin and Han, thanks for sharing your experience and knowledge. I'm hearing you from Italy, Rome, and represent a fund asset manager, Fabrica
Immobiliare.
Okay. Active in care homes
Maybe it's
and senior
Immobiliare.
living.
Sorry, but a French accent, not Italian.
Okay, great. The letter is almost inexistent in Italy at the moment. Interesting to see so many similarities in the social trends there is in the US and a country like Italy. Grazie for sharing. I am all ears. Well, hey, thank you. Thank you so much for joining from Italy.
Yeah, I think what Fulvia's question or comment, it's really a comment, is just reflecting how the U.S. has changed, and the U.S. in many ways has been leading the rest of the world in the development of these communities that provide the services and care that an older American, an older adult would need. And the baby boom phenomenon was spread through many countries in the world, and I think many other countries are going to be grappling with the same issues. So I don't know very much about the senior housing or lack of it in Italy or other European countries, but I would certainly hope that over the next decade you'll see further developments, and people might look to the U.S. to see what has been successful here.
Great. So what do you think, Kelvin? How can senior housing prepare for future outbreaks?
For future outbreaks. One thing that we've all learned is you have to follow some of the basic public health recommendations, some of the common sense recommendations. I remember when I was young, my mom said, wash your hands. Of course, I was an 8-year-old boy. I sometimes did. We see a lot of recommendations for masks and vaccines that unfortunately have been politicized because the evidence shows that they save lives. And we saw that in the very first wave of the pandemic, the nursing homes were very hard hit, and they didn't have a lot of those precautions in place. Now, you didn't have vaccines at that point, and people didn't know about the virus, so they didn't have the masks. The good news is most senior housing communities, senior communities across the country have very high levels of vaccination right now. During the current wave, the Omicron wave of COVID, you're not seeing the huge crises in nursing homes the way you did a year and a half ago. That's so we've made some progress, and we've made some progress again because we're following the public health recommendations, and I do think that they're very sensible recommendations. I think the best thing that we can do going forward is recognize that we can interact with people, we can live good lives with some, some minor inconveniences that keep us all safe. Again, masks, vaccines, a bit of social distancing. Right now, I'm not going out and doing a whole lot in my community just because there's a high level of transmission. And I don't want to catch it myself, and I would not want to pass it on to someone else if I would catch it. That's simply respect for my community.
Very true, very true. And I'm just thinking out loud, another component to consider, I guess, when preparing for any future outbreaks is to have better HVAC system. And I know there's some great technologies out there in the works, and I hope to see more of that in the forefront and incorporate it upstream in senior housing.
That's right. A higher airflow and filtration can remove all of the potentially dangerous virus particles that are floating in the air, and that can help. And sometimes people put in temporary stopgaps of fans and open windows. You can't have an open window in Boston in January very long, but we can improve the HVAC systems.
Okay, I'm going to acknowledge another guest, Kevin Morris. What areas in the country are most at risk for not having sufficient inventory to accommodate the needs of seniors? What is your take, Kelvin?
I tend to focus on the national trends. I don't know the specific markets enough to address that. And I deal with senior housing and offices and apartments and retail and data centers and so on. I'm sorry, Kevin. I just have not looked at that. I do know that most major cities have quite a few options in terms of senior living. And I think you get in smaller cities and rural areas and you're less likely to see it. But I don't have a whole lot more to say on that topic.
Thank you, though. Kevin, I hope that anyone who's listening or watching later perhaps can chime into that. It's a great question. Thank you so much, Kevin.
I see you jumped over a comment from Connie Hayworth in Massachusetts saying that it's not just the nurses and the service people in these communities. Many times the management team is stepping in to fill the gaps, and that's true. They're working as hard as they can, and it's a challenge, and they're having burnout. Yes, that's certainly a problem. And I'm hoping that over the course of this year we'll see fewer COVID cases and people not having to isolate. So you have the staff work, your colleagues are there with you. I'm hoping that we see that situation ease.
Thank you, Connie. Appreciate your question. So now, how can we make senior housing more about people instead of doctors, prescriptions, and restrictive layouts?
Well, we do need to have the access to doctors and prescriptions and so on. But again, these are communities. And as communities, it's not just that you have a bunch of people together. You have activities. One of the things that I've seen in my mother's case is that they have movies that they can see. They have lectures. They have outings. She doesn't get out as much now as she did when she was in her early 90s, but they would go to the symphony on certain nights. They would do things so that, again, you're living a healthy life, a normal life. You're just living it in a community with people of a similar age. And I think focusing on the community of these facilities, it's really the people that matter. And you're providing the things that they need, again, through the activities that keep them engaged.
So is the idea of aging without assistance or dignity concerning to you, or is it encouraging, Kelvin?
Aging without you...
assistance or dignity.
Okay, I would say that, well, what we're saying is that they're different ways. Aging in your own, aging in place versus aging in a facility. Is that what you're... A decade or so ago, maybe 15 years ago, there was a lot of focus on helping people age in place when you did not have as many options for senior housing. And so these are things that in the community provided things that people needed, like uh, vans that would come and help take people, shopping or to the metro or things like that. Providing door-to-door service to help older people who are aging in place in their own home as opposed to moving to a senior housing. And those can fit some needs. Those are important if you only have a moderate level of special needs as you're aging. Many of us, if we're lucky enough to live long enough, we'll get to the point where we do need more assistance, or we do need more help, where we're able to do less of the things around our house. At that point, many people probably would be highly likely to move into some form of independent living, assisted living as needed.
So how has health and senior housing changed over the years?
Well, health and senior housing has changed because we are seeing preventive health offered to people before they have a crisis. I mentioned earlier about my mother's experience with acknowledging her balance. The communities that can have nursing available on site where someone could get some preventive care that they wouldn't get if they were at home by themselves is a real enhancement to the quality of life. Lots of other things that can help as well, whether it's help with prescriptions, eyesight, all of these issues are really essential if you want to keep being an active and enjoying your life as you get older.
Very true. People are living longer, and I think there's means to continue to have the quality of life, right? I think it's abundance right now. Although I think globally we've all been hit very hard, and once we all absorb the hit from this pandemic and continue to thrive, I think there's abundance. There's just exponential growth in technologies to allow people to age wherever they want, wherever it's best for them, whether it's at home, in a community. It's a wide range of living options, and I think we are in a very blessed place right now to have those options. Okay, so what do you think we could benefit from looking at how our grandparents live so that we can better create environments for aging adults today?
I think it's recognizing that my grandparents lived good lives, but you reach a point where it's easier to continue to have the things that are important to you in terms of living your daily function and interacting with people when you're not just on your own in your own house. We have a strong streak of independence in our country, and having your own home is a good form of independence. I like my own home, but I can recognize that at some point I will probably prefer moving someplace where I'm not isolated in my own home.
I got you at the end. Do you mind repeating that?
Oh, did I go out again?
Yeah, that's okay. I got
Okay,
pieces
I'm
right
sorry.
there.
My screen continued to show. I think that, there's a big contrast with my grandparents' generation, and they maintained their own home until well into their senior years. Actually, my grandmother, my father's mother, did end up living in a senior community for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. She lived till she was 96. We have a lot of longevity in my life, but I think the contrast is really big because they didn't have the options that we have today. My grandparents did not have the option of moving into a community of people who were still, living vibrant lives. They just needed a little bit of assistance with things in the apartment or so on. And it's actually a pretty easy trade-off to say, I may give up some of the independence of the home where I've been for 25 years or 40 years, but I move into a community where I have people around me and I can get the other services that I need. So I think it's the contrast with my parents. Not that I saw anything wrong with my grandparents' lives, but they just did not have the choices that we have for senior living today.
I think it's making it clear to the media what that value proposition is for senior housing, because some of them might be stuck on what they know of senior housing 10, 20 years ago. So I think, well, that draws one of the driving forces behind conversations like this is put it out in the media of the options that you have. Sure, some are expensive, some may not be, some could be more affordable for you, but the key is that you have options right now. So now, Kelvin, do you have any tips for maintaining a healthy lifestyle as we age?
I'm tempted to say eat an apple a day, but that's well, eating healthy. Eating healthy is important, and actually, that's one thing that you can get in a senior community. A lot of them provide dining room meals that you can choose different options, whether it's just dinner or 2 or 3 meals a day. You can have better nutrition than if you had to be cooking on your own independently. But I really think I would stress 3 points. One is your healthy diet, healthy lifestyle, active lifestyle to the extent that you can. Another is engagement with with other people, not just your family and neighbors, but in a senior community, there are a lot of people who are there during the day who want to talk, who want to play cards, who want to visit with people that you wouldn't get independently. And it's this engagement with other people that keeps us vibrant. And another is activities. I mentioned some of these earlier, whether it's a lecture, a discussion, a slideshow, a movie, listening to music, the things that we've enjoyed from the time we were little kids up through our older years. We haven't lost our love for those things. And the way you keep active is to keep doing those things. So my hobby is I sing in a barbershop quartet, and there are a lot of older men and older women who sing in quartets, and it's fun to do these activities, and it brings new life to you when you keep involved in the things that you loved doing when you were a teenager or at any point through your life.
That's wonderful. I am going through a phase like that myself. My husband and I are empty nesters, so we're exploring, learning a new purpose, right? Because our children are adults now, and it can be an exciting time. You have to seek what that new purpose, that new joy in life. But I think that's ongoing, right? And I appreciate your wisdom, your thoughts, and just your passion in this industry. So thank you so much. So the pandemic has increased mortality among older adults and made many more dependent on their families for care. And many seniors are also grappling with chronic health problems, limited mobility, and financial difficulties as they try to maintain their independence in an increasingly expensive world. So thank you so much, Kelvin. We appreciate your insights on the overall market and how COVID affects senior housing, healthcare costs, and staffing shortages across the country. So we'll see what the baby boomers do next as they enter the next demographic wave. So please keep up with Kelvin's important work by following him on LinkedIn. And please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Aging Media Show. Hit that notification bell for future videos on our series about senior housing issues. You will also get an email reminder before videos go live on YouTube or Facebook. And we appreciate you, and we love that you share your thoughts here. And until next time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.